Hey guys, welcome aboard to Snoozy Voyager, the only history channel specifically designed to knock you unconscious before the second act. Tonight, we are ditching the pirate ships and the merchant vessels and the scurvy, and we are going somewhere far more dangerous, a California commune in 1969. That's right, tonight you are not a sailor. Tonight you are a hippie cult leader, and before you panic, no, this is not a compliment. Now, before we get into it, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Genuinely, no pressure. I'm just one person making long, absurd history videos for people who are too tired to watch television, but too wired to actually sleep. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. It is always, somehow, 2 a.m, always. If someone suggested tonight's topic, you know who you are, and I want you to know that I have very complicated feelings about you. Now dim those lights, turn on a fan, pull that blanket up to your chin, maybe light some incense if you have it, which, now that I think about it, is extremely on brand for tonight. Get comfortable, breathe. Because before we begin, I need you to sit with a few questions. Have you ever wondered what it actually took to lead a hippie commune in the 1960s? Did the free love philosophy come with any kind of HR policy? What did you actually eat when your entire belief system was against the concept of grocery stores? Was anyone in charge of washing the communal dishes? Or did everyone just quietly agree to pretend the sink didn't exist? Or did you have to write your own scripture? Or could you just riff? What happened when your followers started asking questions you hadn't prepared answers for? Was there a budget? Could you fire someone from a commune? And most importantly, did anyone, at any point, actually sleep? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1969. You're barefoot on a patch of dusty California earth, surrounded by people who have decided collectively that you are the answer. You have a name that is probably not your birth name. You have a philosophy that you are making up as you go. And somewhere in the distance, someone is playing a bongo drum that will never stop. Good luck. Let's start at the beginning, which, in your case, is a very confusing place. You did not wake up one morning and decide to lead a cult. That is not how this works. What actually happened is considerably more embarrassing. You were a 20-something drifter, recently fired from your second job in a row, crashing on somebody's floor in San Francisco, when you said something at a party that sounded profound. You don't even remember what it was. Something about the moon, maybe, or the military-industrial complex, or the way capitalism made you feel like a cog. But the 3 people standing near the cheese plate looked at you like you had just parted the Pacific Ocean, and something in you, some small, dangerous, deeply human part of you, did not correct them. That was the moment, not a vision, not a divine calling. Just bad cheese and people who needed something to believe in. In the weeks that follow, you notice something. People keep finding you. Word spreads in the way that word spreads in San Francisco in 1969, through crash pads and coffee houses and the particular informal telephone network of people who share rolling papers and ideas in equal measure. Someone tells someone who tells someone else that they met a person who really gets it, that they met someone who sees through the whole thing, and that person is you. You, who are still wearing the same flannel shirt you've had since '67 and eating whatever is in the communal refrigerator, which is mostly mustard and someone's experimental fermented something that nobody will claim. The feeling of being seen as a prophet is, if you are being honest with yourself, not entirely unpleasant. This is the part that no cult leader memoir ever quite captures. It feels good. It feels good to have people listen. It feels good to say something and watch faces open with recognition. You spent most of your 20s being ignored in one way or another, by employers, by parents, by a society that had a very specific idea of what a successful young man was supposed to look like, and you were not it. And now, suddenly, you're not just included, you're the centre. You're the thing the room organises itself around. This is exactly as dangerous as it sounds, because here is what happens next. You start to believe it a little bit yourself, not the full mythology. You're not delusional, not yet, and the best cult leaders rarely are at the start. But you begin to think that maybe there is something to the idea that you see things others don't, that your outsider status was actually a form of clarity. Either that your failures were preparation rather than just failures. Modern psychology would have a field day with this thought process, and in fact it already has, in several excellent books published in subsequent decades. But in 1969, on a floor in San Francisco with 3 earnest people sitting cross-legged in front of you waiting for you to say something meaningful, the psychological literature is not immediately available. So you talk. You talk about what is wrong with the world, which in 1969 is a target-rich environment. You talk about Vietnam and corporations and the death of genuine human connection. You talk about returning to something more real. And when you are done talking, someone asks, "So what do we do about it?" And you pause for exactly the right amount of time. And you say, "We build something different." And they nod. And just like that, without a plan or a property or a single practical consideration, you are a leader. Congratulations. You have no idea what you've just agreed to. Nobody in the movement is going to follow someone named Gary. This is an uncomfortable truth you figure out very early. Your given name, whatever it is, sounds like someone who manages a mid-level insurance account, and that is not the vibe you are going for. The new name has to feel ancient without being too obvious. It has to suggest wisdom, cosmic significance, and just a hint of menace. You've watched other people choose names like Sunbeam and River and Hawk, and while those are fine, they don't quite carry the weight of leadership. You need something that makes people pause. Something they can't fully pronounce on the first try. It is, you will later realise, essentially the same psychology behind luxury car naming. Vague, foreign-sounding, and designed to make the buyer feel chosen. You spend 3 days sitting by a creek before landing on something that you announce at dinner with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for funerals. The naming process is more strategic than anyone lets on. Across the counterculture, names are being shed and replaced with an almost industrial efficiency. Birth names belong to the old world, to draft cards and social security numbers, and the whole bureaucratic machinery of a society you've renounced. A new name is a declaration of self-authorship. It says, "I am not who they said I was. I'm something I chose." This is genuinely radical and also, let's be honest, a little theatrical. But theatre has always been part of how human beings signal belonging to a tribe, from war paint to 3-piece suits, to whatever is happening with your new name, which your followers are now saying with a reverence that still catches you slightly off guard. There is an art to maintaining the name with a straight face, and it takes practice. The first few weeks, someone will call it across a field, and you will not respond immediately because some part of your brain is still answering to Gary, and there is a half-second delay before you catch yourself and turn with the appropriate gravity. You will not be the only one doing this. Half the people on the commune are running similar software updates. You will be mid-conversation with someone called Falcon, and you will think, I know for a fact your mother calls you Dennis. Your old name doesn't disappear, of course. It lives in the paperwork, on the van's registration, in the file at the county assessor's office. The outside world has a stubborn commitment to the name on your birth certificate, and it will keep using it in ways that are mildly deflating. When the county health inspector shows up and asks to speak to the property owner, he will use a name that causes 3 of your followers to look at you with an expression you will choose not to examine too closely. The deeper function of the name, beyond the symbolism, is the permission structure it creates. A new name is a new self, and a new self is not bound by the old self's doubts and limitations and history of being let go from jobs for quote attitude issues. You are starting clean, harmed, or you are who you say you are. And in 1969, on the edge of something that feels genuinely new. That is not nothing. It is in fact the most American thing you've ever done. The complete reinvention of a self, conducted with total sincerity and a complete absence of irony. The frontier has always run on exactly this fuel. Every commune needs a physical home, and finding yours is a process best described as buying a car when you have no money and strong opinions about the energy of parking lots. The land has to feel right. This is a concept that will cost you more time than any practical consideration. You will stand in the middle of several perfectly usable fields and declare that the vibrations are wrong. And the people with you will nod seriously because this is who you have become. What you're actually looking for, beneath all the spiritual language, is a property with a well, some shade trees, and enough distance from the nearest neighbour that nobody calls the county about the drum circles. California in the late 1960s had pockets of cheap, remote land, often because it had no running water or reliable road access, and this is exactly the kind of place that will become your kingdom. The search takes weeks. You pile several people into a van. The van, which is a 1962 Ford that runs on optimism and a prayer to whatever engine God will listen, and you drive through the rural counties north and east of San Francisco, stopping at properties advertised in the back pages of underground newspapers and by word of mouth through networks of people who are also, in various stages, trying to do what you're trying to do. You see a lot of land. Some of it is beautiful. Some of it is beautiful and completely without water, which in the practical sense means it is not beautiful. It is a decorated death sentence. You pass on those. There are also the legal complications which your philosophy has not fully equipped you to handle. Land costs money. Deeds involve lawyers. Zoning laws have opinions about how many unrelated people can occupy a single residential property that are sharply at odds with your vision of communal living. You need someone in your group with a credit history, which narrows the field considerably, because a significant number of your current followers have made certain lifestyle choices that the banking system has noted with disapproval. Eventually a solution presents itself in the form of a sympathetic older man, a former professor, or possibly just someone who presents himself as a former professor, who is willing to hold the deed in his name in exchange for an arrangement that you will spend the next several years quietly trying to renegotiate. The day you first walk the property that will become the commune, you do feel something. Standing in a wide, dry meadow with oak trees at the edges and a creek running along the southern boundary, in the long golden light of a California afternoon, you feel something settle in your chest. Whether this is genuine spiritual resonance or just the relief of finally making a decision after 6 weeks of driving around in a van with people who have strong opinions about everything you cannot say for certain. But you stand there and you put your hands on your hips and you say something like, "This is it." And everyone around you exhales, and that is that. The commune has a home. Now you just have to build it, which is a different problem entirely, and one that will keep you awake on several consecutive nights in ways the vision of the meadow did not fully prepare you for. At some point you are going to need to explain what exactly you believe, not in the loose vibes-based way you have been operating up until now, but in a way that people can repeat back to you. This is harder than it sounds. The challenge is that your philosophy needs to be broad enough to include everyone, specific enough to sound like something, and internally consistent enough that nobody catches the contradictions, at least not immediately. You start writing in a journal. Long looping sentences about oneness, about the sickness of modern society, about returning to something older and truer and more real. You borrow freely from Eastern religion, from Western mysticism, from a paperback about Jungian psychology you found at a thrift store, and from a folk song you half remember from a campfire 2 summers ago. The result is, if you're being honest with yourself, mostly vibes. But it has a rhythm to it, and rhythm, you are learning, is most of the battle. The great secret of any spiritual philosophy, and this is something you are working out in real time, which is slightly terrifying, is that clarity is less important than resonance. You do not need people to fully understand what you're saying. You need them to feel that understanding is just around the corner, that if they sit with it long enough, the meaning will unfurl like a flower that is always, perpetually about to open. This is not cynicism. This is just how language works when it is doing its best work. Every religious tradition ever written has the same quality. Every text that has made a person feel seen without quite being able to say why is operating on the same frequency. You are not corrupting something sacred. You are, somewhat accidentally, learning how it works. The core of your philosophy, distilled to its essence after weeks of journal writing, goes something like this. The modern world has severed human beings from each other, from the natural world, and from their own deeper selves. The healing of this severance requires withdrawal from the structures that perpetuate it, and the building of new structures rooted in love, shared labour, and conscious intention. This is not a wrong idea. It is in fact a genuinely good idea. One with roots going back through the transcendentalists to various utopian communities throughout Western history, most of which also ended badly, a fact you have chosen not to dwell on. The problem is not the philosophy. The problem, as you'll discover, is the gap between the philosophy and the behaviour of actual human beings, including yourself, when placed under sustained communal pressure. You write it all out in longhand, revise it several times, and eventually have someone with better handwriting copy it into a notebook that becomes, without anyone officially deciding this, the commune's founding text. People read it. People reference it in conversations and arguments. Someone memorizes long passages of it and recites them at meals. You watch this happen with a feeling you cannot quite name. Part pride, part responsibility, part something else. A quiet awareness that the words have left you now, that they belong to everyone who reads them and not to you anymore, and that this is both exactly what you wanted and slightly more than you bargained for. You're not going to stand on a street corner with a sign. That is not your style, and also it is extremely inefficient. what you're going to do is exactly what every cult leader in history has done, whether they admitted it or not. You're going to be magnetic in the places where people are already lost. The late 1960s produced an extraordinary number of young Americans who had left home, left school, left the war, left something, and arrived in cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles with no plan and a very strong feeling that the old world was broken. These are your people. Not because they are weak, most of them are remarkably intelligent, but because they are searching, and you, standing there with your new name and your borrowed philosophy and your absolute certainty, look exactly like something worth finding. The coffee houses and free clinics and crash pads of the hate are your recruiting ground, though you would never use that word. You are not recruiting. You are sharing. You are being present. You're having conversations. These are all true, and they are also functionally recruitment. You learn quickly which conversation to have with which person. With the disillusioned college dropout, you talk about the bankruptcy of institutional education. With the Vietnam vet who can't sleep, you talk about healing and the possibility of something gentler. With the girl who ran away from a suburb in Ohio, you talk about belonging. You're not lying to any of them. You believe everything you say, but you're also with the unerring instinct of someone who needs people to come with him, saying the specific true thing that each specific person most needs to hear. This is a gift. It is also a warning sign, but you do not know that yet. What you are offering, at its most stripped down, is family. The word comes up again and again in the counterculture, deployed with a kind of desperate sincerity. We are family. This is family. You are family now. Because the people who are drawn to you have, almost universally, complicated feelings about their actual families. They have left them, or been left by them, or are in the process of negotiating what that relationship means when you no longer share their values, their politics, but their idea of what a life is supposed to look like. The commune is the replacement family, and you are, by necessity and by temperament, the father of it. Your first 10 genuine followers arrive in the space of about 2 months. They are a remarkably varied group. A former engineering student from Berkeley, 2 girls who met at a Grateful Dead concert and have been inseparable since, a Vietnam veteran who speaks very little but works harder than anyone else, a man in his 40s who was a high school English teacher until recently and whose reasons for leaving that career he has not fully explained, and several others. They have almost nothing in common except the thing they came looking for and the fact that they found you first. You feed them. You talk to them for hours. You make them feel with the full force of your attention that they matter. And they stay. And when they tell people about what they found, this place, this feeling, this person, they use a word you will hear for the rest of your life. The word that both warms and unsettles you every time. Home. The land is yours. Now you have to build something on it. And by build, you largely mean construct a series of structures that would fail every building code in the state of California if the state of California knew they existed. The first priority is shelter. In the summer of 1969, this is somewhat optional, but come November, the communal sleeping arrangement of a few tarps strung between trees is going to become a theological crisis. Some of your followers have skills. One used to work construction before he dropped out. Another grew up on a farm and knows roughly how to do things with wooden nails. A surprising number of your people, however, have absolutely no practical skills whatsoever and are primarily good at talking about the spiritual importance of manual labour without actually performing it. You will learn to identify these people quickly. They're always very eager to be in charge of the fire. The main structure goes up over the course of about 3 weeks. A large barn-like building with a dirt floor and walls that are technically load-bearing, but whose confidence in that role is limited. It is built with salvaged lumber, donated materials, and the kind of communal energy that is genuinely moving to watch, whatever its structural implications. People who have never held a hammer before hold one now. Like people who have never dug a trench now dig one, albeit not to any agreed upon depth, because the discussion about the spiritually correct depth of a trench took longer than the actual digging. The building goes up crooked. It leans slightly to the left, which several people point out is metaphorically appropriate, and which the builder, the former construction worker, regards with an expression of quiet professional grief. Around the main building, smaller structures grow organically. A kitchen area with a wood-burning stove that was dragged from a salvage yard in a truck that was not rated for that load. A bathing area near the creek, which works beautifully in summer and requires a level of commitment to the principles of physical hardship in February. A small structure designated for meditation, which everyone treats with reverence and which is also quietly the best place to go when you need 10 minutes away from everyone. The garden gets its own dedicated space, marked out with stones and planted with more optimism than soil knowledge. Tomatoes, beans, squash, herbs, and one wildly ambitious attempt at corn that the deer will eventually address. What strikes you, watching all of this take shape, is how much of what you are building is improvised, and how much that improvisation is, in its own way, historically continuous. Human beings have been building improvised communal settlements for all of recorded history. Every frontier town, every refugee camp, every monastic community that started from nothing looked in its first month something like this, rough, temporary seeming, wholly organised around the specific skills of whoever happened to be there. The tools are different, the ideology is different, but the impulse to make a place, together, from available materials and shared will, is as old as shelter itself. You think about this sometimes, standing in the half-finished main hall with sawdust on your feet, and the smell of fresh lumber in the air, and it makes you feel connected to something vast and long. Then someone asks you where to put the composting toilet, and the feeling passes. One of the first things that surprises new commune members, and surprises you, frankly, is how much of a commune's life is structured. The whole point was to escape the rigid, clock-watching tyranny of mainstream American society. And yet, without some kind of schedule, the commune descends within approximately 4 days into a state of domestic chaos so complete that no one can find their shoes, and someone has eaten all the lentils meant for dinner. You introduce what you call the rhythm of the day, which sounds much more poetic than the word schedule, and achieves the exact same thing. Mornings begin with a group meditation at sunrise, which is wonderful in theory, and involves a lot of squinting in practice. After that comes a period you call collective labour, which is the chores. Just chores. You have simply renamed chores. The sunrise meditation is, in fairness, genuinely valuable. In the cool early morning before the day's complications begin, sitting together on the ground in more or less silence creates a feeling of shared purpose and calm that carries people through the first few hours. This is not magic. This is just what happens when human beings sit quietly together at the start of a day. Monks have known this for centuries. Armies have known this. Your average kindergarten teacher with a circle time routine knows this. The insight is universal, which does not make it any less real. The problem is that about a third of your commune is not, by nature, a morning person, and their presence at sunrise meditation is technically voluntary, which creates a subtle social pressure that is technically not coercion but functionally is. Nobody wants to be the one who didn't come. After meditation and collective labour comes the midday meal, which is communal, and which functions as both a practical necessity and a social ritual. Everyone eats together. This sounds obvious and lovely, and it mostly is. Except that the meal preparation rotation is a source of ongoing diplomatic tension. Some people are good cooks. Some people have no idea what they are doing and produce things that are, in the gentlest possible terms, spiritually nourishing but texturally challenging. There is a man on your commune who genuinely believes that everything is improved by adding more garlic, a theory that the commune has now tested extensively and found to be incorrect. The afternoons are for the garden, the animals, ongoing construction, and the various small maintenance tasks that a property of this kind generates in apparently infinite supply. Evenings are for gathering, music, conversation, the long rambling discussions about ideas and plans and the meaning of things that are, if you're honest, among the best parts of the whole enterprise. And people who have been doing physical labour all day come together at dusk with a looseness and an openness that is genuinely beautiful. The arguments are real, the laughter is real. The sense that this is worth something is real. The schedule, the rhythm, makes all of this possible. Structure, it turns out, does not cancel freedom. It is the thing that creates the container inside which freedom can actually function. You know this in your bones. You just can't say it out loud, because the word structure is currently rated very poorly among your constituency. Here is something nobody warned you about when you decide to lead a back-to-the-land commune. Farming is extraordinarily difficult, and most of your followers have never done it. The ideological commitment to growing your own food, pure, uncontaminated by capitalism, nourishing in both body and soul, runs headlong into the physical reality of California soil, crop timing, pest management, and the fact that 3 of your best workers just spent a week on a vision quest and forgot to water the tomatoes. In the early months, the commune survives on a combination of whatever the garden actually produces, which is mostly zucchini, donations from sympathetic outsiders, and bulk purchases of brown rice and dried beans from a food co-op 40 minutes away in a van that may or may not be roadworthy on any given Tuesday. The zucchini problem deserves its own mention. Nobody warned you about zucchini. Everyone who has ever grown a garden knows the particular existential burden of zucchini, the way it starts as a hopeful seedling and becomes, over the course of about 2 weeks in August, a vegetable empire so prolific and unstoppable that you begin to wonder if you have made a grave error in your planting ratio. Your commune will eat zucchini in forms you did not previously know were possible. Roasted zucchini, zucchini stew, zucchini bread, which sounds wrong but is actually fine. Raw zucchini, because sometimes dinner is late and people are hungry, and the zucchini is simply there, enormous and judgmental, waiting to be dealt with. 3 people will develop a complex negative relationship with zucchini during this period that will follow them for the rest of their lives. Beyond zucchini, the garden produces inconsistently. Tomatoes do well in good years and catastrophically in bad ones. Beans are reliable. The corn was a loss. The herbs thrive, which is philosophically satisfying and calorically irrelevant. What the commune actually runs on, in the nutritional sense, is the brown rice and beans from the co-op, supplemented by whatever can be foraged, traded for, or accepted as donation. Foraging, actual foraging for wild plants and berries and mushrooms, is practiced with great enthusiasm and variable expertise. The mushroom situation specifically is one you handle carefully by designating a single person with actual mycological knowledge to make all final mushroom identification decisions. This is one of the more genuinely important rules you will ever institute. Food preparation is a communal act and a political one. The cook is a person of enormous daily power in the way that anyone who controls what other people eat has always had power. You rotate the role, which distributes the power, but also distributes the variance in quality. Set. And on the nights when dinner is genuinely good, fresh bread from the outdoor oven, beans slow cooked with herbs from the garden, maybe something roasted, the commune achieves a state of collective contentment that feels like proof of everything you are trying to build. People linger, people talk, people are fed in both the literal and the more poetic sense. And on the nights when dinner is a thin soup of uncertain ingredients, and everyone is quietly still a little hungry, you give a short talk about abundance and gratitude that is, in retrospect, doing a lot of heavy lifting. Your philosophy says everyone is equal. Your commune operates on the principle of horizontal leadership, shared decision-making, and the radical rejection of power structures. You believe this, or you believed it. The problem is that your commune has been running for about 6 weeks, and the horizontal leadership model has produced exactly one completed project, a very small fence, and several hundred hours of circular conversation that have resolved nothing. So, quietly and without anyone officially saying so, a hierarchy forms. There is you at the top, obviously, though nobody calls it that. Then there are 3 or 4 people whose opinions you tend to agree with, which means their opinions carry more weight. Then there are the workers, the reliable ones who actually do the labour, and then, at the bottom, there are the people who just arrived last week and have not yet proven themselves. This is almost exactly the structure of every organisation in human history. You have simply renamed all the positions. The mechanics of how this hierarchy functions without being named are fascinating if you step back far enough to observe them, which you occasionally do with a mixture of intellectual interest and creeping unease. Decisions get made in a very specific way. Someone raises something at a group meeting. The group discusses it. Then, at a certain point, eyes turn to you. Not always overtly. Sometimes it is just a slight orientation of bodies, a collective holding of breath, a subtle pressure of attention that lands on you like a hand on a shoulder. You speak. And whatever you say, even if you frame it as just another perspective, just one voice among equals, tends to become the decision. People have learned to read your preferences, your hesitations, your silences. They have become skilled interpreters of you. Then this is flattering and slightly frightening because it means that the commune's direction is more dependent on your mood than your philosophy ever intended. The hierarchy also expresses itself through space. Without anyone assigning it, you have the best sleeping arrangement. Your meals are prepared first. When you want to be alone, people give you space. When you walk into a room, conversations shift. None of this was dictated. All of it was offered freely by people who found that treating you as special made their own lives feel more meaningful. This is a very old dynamic. It has been running in human communities since before writing. The anthropologists call it prestige hierarchy, the kind based not on force but on perceived wisdom and competence. It is gentler than dominance hierarchy. It is also in some ways harder to dismantle. Yasta, because everyone involved has chosen it. You're aware of all this. You're not unaware. The best and most dangerous leaders always know exactly what is happening, and the knowing does not necessarily stop it. What you do with the awareness, whether you use it to correct the imbalance or to manage it more effectively, is the question that separates the ones who are remembered as misguided visionaries from the ones who are remembered as something worse. You are, as of right now, still in the part of the story where that question has not yet been answered. The commune runs on meetings. Long, sprawling, digressive, emotionally exhausting meetings held in a circle on the ground, because circles are symbolically important and chairs would imply hierarchy. Every decision, where to route the new water line, what to do about the dog that bit someone, whether the new arrivals from Ohio can stay, goes through the group. In theory, this is beautiful. In practice, you will spend approximately 4 hours discussing whether to plant more corn, during which the actual question of corn will be addressed for maybe 20 minutes, with the remaining time devoted to a man named Forrest, explaining his feelings about the spiritual symbolism of grain, and a woman named Sage getting into an argument with Forrest about whether he is monopolizing the talking stick. The talking stick is a real object. You introduced it to make meetings more orderly. It has made meetings approximately 40% longer. The structure of a commune meeting has a rhythm you could set a watch to. If watching were not ideologically complicated, it begins with a period of centering, a few minutes of shared silence or a brief meditation, which is genuinely useful and gets everyone into the same room in the same body more or less. Then the agenda, which is loosely organised but does exist, because you introduced an agenda after the third meeting ran until midnight and nothing was decided. The agenda is on a piece of paper that someone is in charge of, and which is subject to addition by anyone who feels moved to add something, which means the agenda reliably grows in the first 20 minutes of every meeting before any items on it have been discussed. Then come the actual conversations, which have a particular quality. Every point made must be validated before it is engaged. To say someone is wrong directly is to create conflict, which the meeting is, in part, designed to avoid. So a great deal of meeting time is spent in the gentle wrapping of disagreement in the language of appreciation. You raise a really important point, someone will say, and then say the opposite thing with slightly different framing. This is not dishonest. It is the commune's attempt to maintain relational warmth while still making decisions, and it works moderately well, except that it takes roughly 4 times longer than it would if people just said what they thought. You have sat in meetings with corporate executives since, and the dynamic is remarkably similar, just with different vocabulary and worse snacks. Your role in the meeting is to facilitate, which means you speak less than you might want to and guide more than anyone realizes. You ask questions that redirect. You summarize in ways that move the conversation gently toward the conclusion that seems most sensible to you. When consensus feels unreachable, you name a path forward and watch the room either accept it or not, and it almost always does, because you have over time developed a feel for when a room is ready to be led and when it needs more space. This is the actual skill of leadership, not the speeches, not the philosophy, but this, knowing when to speak and when to wait, and what to say when you do. You learned it at commune meetings. You could have learned it anywhere, really. But the circle on the ground, the talking stick, the man named Forrest and his feelings about grain, that is where you learned it. You have that going for you, at least. Not everyone who joins the commune stays a believer. Thus, some people arrive full of fire and leave 6 weeks later, slightly thinner and deeply confused. But the ones you have to worry about are not the ones who leave. Those you can absorb into your narrative as people who are not ready, who are not yet free. The ones you have to manage are the ones who stay and start asking questions. The sharp ones. The ones who read your written philosophy carefully and come back with specific objections. The ones who notice that you seem to make exceptions to the communal property rule for certain things. Your books, your tent, your particular ceramic mug that nobody else is allowed to touch. You have developed over time a set of rhetorical tools for handling these conversations. The most effective one is to respond to a direct question with a deeper question. It buys you time. It sounds wise. And it makes the questioner feel like the problem is inside them, not inside your argument. The doubters come in recognizable types, and after a few months you can identify them almost immediately. There is the intellectual who has read everything you have read and several things you haven't, and who frames objections in the language of philosophy and asks you, with great politeness, to reconcile two apparently contradictory statements from your founding text. You handle the intellectual with respect, because they are usually the most genuinely engaged members of the commune, and because dismissing them too quickly makes you look afraid of ideas, which is the one thing a leader with a philosophy cannot afford to look. You engage seriously, you take your time. You find the thread of truth in your position and pull it until it covers the gap. Sometimes it works. Sometimes they leave anyway, shaking their head with a kind of fond exasperation, which is the best outcome you can hope for with an intellectual. Then there is the pragmatist, who does not particularly care about the philosophy and cares enormously about whether things work. The pragmatist's questions are not abstract. They are about the water situation, the food supply, the state of the roof, the fact that 3 people have been sick in the last month, and the commune's medical resources are a box of dried herbs and good intentions. The pragmatist is, in many ways, the most valuable person on the commune and also the most exhausting to lead. Is just more listim? Because they are always right. And being always right in the presence of a leader who needs to be seen as visionary creates a friction that neither of you fully acknowledges, but both of you feel constantly. You address pragmatist concerns by acting on them quietly and quickly, and then framing the resulting improvements as the natural flowering of the communal intention. The roof gets fixed, the medical supplies get restocked. Nobody announces that the pragmatist was correct. That is the arrangement. The third type is the most delicate. The true believer who has started to wobble. This is someone who came to you completely open, who absorbed the philosophy entirely, who was one of your most devoted and energetic members, and who has begun quietly and privately and with what you can only describe as grief, to notice the gap between what you said and what is. These conversations are the hardest because they are not adversarial. They are sad. The person sitting across from you is not trying to defeat you. They are hoping you will say something that closes the gap again, that restores the feeling they came here looking for. And you do your best. You really do. You say the true things and you mean them. But you both know, in the space between the words, that some gaps do not close, and the best you can offer is company while standing in them. Word travels fast in the counterculture, and by the time your commune has been running for a few months, you are getting visitors. Some are sincere seekers, some are journalists, Some are young people from suburban Ohio who read about communes in a magazine and drove out on a road trip to see if any of it was real. You have to decide with each new arrival what they represent: potential members, potential donors, potential threats, or potential press. The journalist you're careful with. One bad article in the wrong publication can bring the wrong kind of attention. The suburban kids you welcome warmly because they often have money, and the commune's finances are best described as precarious. The sincere seekers you take seriously, because they are the ones who might stay, and staying members are the backbone of everything you are trying to build. This constant intake and evaluation of strangers is, you realize, essentially the same as running HR for a company. You are doing HR, or you are the HR department of a commune. The visitors arrive with a particular quality of expectation that you learn to read very quickly. They have heard something from a friend, from a newspaper, from the general atmospheric buzz of the counterculture. And what they heard has been filtered through their own desires into something that may or may not correspond to what your commune actually is. Some of them have arrived expecting a utopia of constant joy and free food and effortless community. These visitors are in for a recalibration, because what they find instead is people doing laundry and arguing about the composting system, and having the complicated feelings that human beings have when they live in extremely close proximity to each other. The gap between the expectation and the reality is not itself a condemnation of the commune. But you have learned to manage the gap carefully, because a visitor who leaves disappointed is a visitor who tells people a story you did not write. The journalists are a particular challenge. They arrive with notebooks and with the particular alert stillness of people who are paid to notice things. And they notice things that you would prefer to frame differently. They notice that you eat better than some of your followers. They notice that certain decisions happen before they reach the group meeting. They notice that the people who have been here longest move differently than the people who arrived recently, with more ease, more authority, a proprietary quality in how they occupy the space. You give good interviews. You have always been good at talking, and talking to journalists is just talking with the added awareness that the words will be repeated, which sharpens your thinking considerably. You say the things that are true and that are also, usefully, the things that reflect well. This is not lying. This is curation. Every leader does it. Most just don't have a journalist in their kitchen while they do. The ones you remember most in the long run are not the journalists or the skeptics, but the genuine seekers who arrived and stayed, who walked onto the property, looked around at the rough buildings and the garden and the circle of people eating dinner together in the evening light and felt something shift. You can see it happen. A loosening around the eyes, a breath that goes deeper than the last one. You have given people that experience consistently enough to believe that it is real, that the commune offers something actual and not just something performed. That belief is what keeps you going on the hard days. And in 1969, on a piece of the land in California, with a leaning barn and a very productive zucchini situation, the hard days are reliable as sunrise. The free love philosophy, as you understood it going in, was about liberation, about releasing human beings from the puritanical, possessive structures of conventional romance, about love as an expansive, generous force, rather than a transaction between two people who have each agreed to be miserable exclusively with each other. This is a beautiful idea. It becomes, in practice, an absolutely spectacular source of interpersonal conflict. The commune, at any given moment, contains several overlapping romantic situations of varying degrees of stability. At least two people who are in love with the same person and trying very hard to be spiritually evolved about it. One couple who claim to be fine with open partnership but are very clearly not fine. And someone who has recently decided that they are meant to be with you specifically, which creates a delicate diplomatic situation that your philosophy has not fully prepared you for. The language of free love in the counterculture carried a specific ideological weight. Jealousy was considered a symptom of capitalist conditioning. The idea that people could be owned, that love was a resource that diminished when shared. To feel jealous was to reveal that you had not yet freed yourself from the old world's programming. This is a genuinely interesting philosophical position. It is also, as several of your commune members are currently discovering, completely at odds with how human neurochemistry actually works. Jealousy does not care about your politics. It arrives unannounced at 2 a.m. and sits on your chest like a stone, regardless of how many group discussions you have had about the social construction of monogamy. You have watched people try to philosophy their way out of it in real time. It does not work. What you get instead is jealousy dressed up in the language of spiritual concern, which is somehow even more exhausting than regular jealousy. Your own romantic situation is complicated in ways that compound your leadership responsibilities. People are drawn to you. This is partly about power and partly about the genuine quality of attention you bring to people, the way you listen, the way you make a person feel seen. On a commune full of people who came here partly because they didn't feel seen in their previous lives, this is enormously magnetic. You have had to develop a careful practice around this magnetism, because the wrong entanglement creates factions, and factions are the commune's most reliable path to dissolution. History bears this out with exhausting consistency. Religious communities, utopian settlements, small revolutionary organizations, all of them have fallen apart faster over love triangles than over any theological dispute. You take this very seriously. You're also a person in your 20s with all the attendant limitations, and seriousness only goes so far. The conflicts that arise from the romantic arrangements are handled in group meetings that are among the most emotionally intense experiences the commune produces. Two people processing a rupture in front of the entire community, trying to maintain the language of love and growth while clearly in considerable pain, while everyone around them tries to hold space with the focused intensity of people who are also invested in this outcome, because everything on a commune is everyone's business. These meetings are exhausting and intimate and occasionally revelatory and always run longer than anyone planned. You facilitate them as best you can. You say true things about love and impermanence and the difference between a relationship ending and something failing. Sometimes it helps. The bongo drum, unfortunately, is always there. Yeah, psychedelics are woven into the fabric of the 1960s counterculture the way coffee is woven into the fabric of a modern office. They are how people access altered states, spiritual insight, and the occasional conversation with a tree that they will describe at length the following morning. As a leader, you have a complicated relationship with this. On one hand, you use them yourself, and the experiences genuinely inform your thinking. On the other hand, a commune in which everyone is simultaneously very high is a commune in which the tomatoes do not get watered. The meeting runs 7 hours, and someone builds a very ambitious structure out of sticks that collapses before dawn. You develop an informal policy, which you frame spiritually. Certain substances are for sacred occasions, not daily use. That is functionally just a productivity intervention. You have essentially invented a drug policy for your commune. You're the OSHA compliance officer of the revolution. The psychedelic experiences of the 1960s were not for many people trivial. The clinical research happening at universities before the government shut it down in the mid-60s suggested genuine therapeutic potential. The experiential reports from your own commune include people describing what sounds, in plain language, like genuine psychological breakthroughs, the resolution of long-held grief, a felt sense of connection to other people and to the natural world, a dissolution of the rigid self-concept that had made someone miserable for years. You have had experiences in this category yourself. You do not dismiss them. They are part of why you believe what you believe and why you are here rather than somewhere else, doing something more conventional with your life. The challenge is frequency and context. A substance that opens a door, used carefully and intentionally, can genuinely change how a person sees. The same substance used every day becomes a way of not being anywhere, not here, not there, floating in a perpetual, almost insight that never quite lands. You have watched people spend months in this state and emerge thinner, more confused, and somewhat disconnected from the practical requirements of being a physical person in a world that has weather and bills and structural needs. Managing this is delicate because you cannot be prescriptive without being hypocritical, and the commune has a strong allergy to anything that resembles being told what to do, so you manage it through ceremony. By making the intentional use of psychedelics into a structured communal ritual, held at specific times, prepared for carefully, processed together afterward, you create a container that gives the experience weight without forbidding it. This is genuinely good thinking. You are proud of it. It also does not fully work, because people do what people do, and not everyone waits for the ceremony. Cannabis is another matter entirely and is essentially ambient. It is in the air. It is in the meetings. It is in the long evening conversations that wind through ideas with a beautiful lack of urgency and arrive several hours later, approximately where they started. You have made peace with this. The mild daily cannabis use of the commune creates a particular social texture, slower, warmer, more forgiving of interruption, less concerned with conclusion. That is not without value. Some of the best ideas the commune has ever had emerge from these conversations. Some of the worst decisions also. The ratio is roughly what you would expect from any human organization, with or without the cannabis, which suggests that the cannabis is less of a variable than the humans, and the humans are the variable you cannot control regardless of your policy position. You wanted to withdraw from mainstream American society, to build something new on the outside of it. The problem is that mainstream American society keeps finding you. There are the local sheriff's deputies who drive by periodically, not always looking for anything specific, just making sure you know they know you're there. There are the neighbors, actual ranching families who have been in this valley for 3 generations, who regard your commune with expressions ranging from baffled tolerance to active hostility. There are the county health officials who have questions about your water situation. There are the parents of your followers, some of whom are furious, who show up occasionally wanting to take their children home. Navigating all of this requires a kind of diplomatic skill that your philosophy of radical withdrawal from society did not anticipate. You are, in practice, a small-town politician. You have simply refused to admit it. The sheriff's deputies are your most consistent external relationship, and managing it requires a specific register, respectful without being deferential, to are open without being inviting. calm in a way that communicates that there is nothing here that requires their continued attention. You meet them at the property line when they come, which is itself a diplomatic choice, because meeting them there rather than inviting them in keeps the encounter on neutral ground and your people out of direct scrutiny. You have a designated person for these interactions, your most conventional-looking commune member, a young woman from Marin County who grew up going to church and knows how to talk to authority figures in a way that registers as normal. She is invaluable. She's also aware that she is invaluable, which is a leverage situation you handle carefully. The neighbours are more complex. Some of them are simply curious. Ranchers who have worked this land their whole lives, encountering a sudden population of young people, doing unfamiliar things in unfamiliar clothes, and whose reaction is essentially anthropological. These neighbours you cultivate. You bring them vegetables from the garden. You offer labour in exchange for equipment loans. You are patient and present, and you ask about their land and their families, and over time some of them come to regard your commune the way they might regard any slightly unusual but essentially harmless neighbour situation. This is a significant achievement. Rural California in 1969 is not uniformly welcoming to communes, and the ones that develop hostile relationships with surrounding communities tend to close inward in ways that accelerate every other problem. You have watched this happen to others. You have filed it carefully. The parents present a category of challenge that is purely emotional, and therefore the most draining. A mother from Connecticut who drives to your property in a rented car to retrieve her 22-year-old son is not an enemy. She's a frightened person who loves someone and does not understand where they have gone. You meet these situations with gentleness and as much transparency as you can offer without giving anyone a reason to involve lawyers. You let people's children speak for themselves because the children are adults, even if nobody in the room fully believes this yet. Most of the parents leave without their children, but with slightly less terror than they arrived with, and that is the best available outcome. A few leave angrier than they came. One leaves and calls a journalist. That particular visit cost you 2 months of careful reputation management and one very unflattering paragraph in a Bay Area newspaper. You clip it out. You put it in a folder. You do not show it to anyone. Children are born on communes. This should not surprise anyone given the earlier discussion of the free love philosophy, but it surprises people every time. The commune's approach to child-rearing is, like most things, deeply ideological and somewhat chaotic in execution. Children here are to be raised communally by the group, not just by biological parents, free from the rigid gender expectations and authoritarian discipline of the mainstream world. This sounds wonderful. What it produces, in your specific case, is a group of small children who've been told by various adults various contradictory things, who have no consistent bedtime, who eat whatever is available and not necessarily in a nutritionally balanced way, and who have developed an extraordinarily sophisticated understanding of adult interpersonal dynamics for their age. The 6-year-old on your commune can read a room better than most politicians. She is frightening. You're a little scared of her. The communal child-rearing model has a genuine philosophical foundation. Throughout most of human history, children were not raised exclusively by 2 parents in an isolated nuclear unit. They were raised by extended family networks, by neighbours, by the village, the phrase it takes. A village is not a modern invention. It is a description of how child-rearing actually worked for most of human existence. The nuclear family in historical terms is the strange experiment. The commune is, in some ways, a return to an older and more distributed model of care. This is a real argument and not a bad one, and it occasionally makes you feel better about the bedtime situation, which remains unresolved. The children who grow up on the commune are, as a group, unusual in specific ways. They are almost universally articulate beyond their years, a product of being raised in an environment where adults talk constantly about everything at length, and where children are present for conversations that most children are excluded from. They are socially comfortable with a wide range of people and ages. They are also less certain about rules than children raised in more conventional environments, not because rules don't exist on the commune, but because the rules are more negotiable, more subject to discussion, were more openly questioned by the adults around them. This is sometimes a strength. It is also when a 5-year-old applies the same negotiation skills to being told to go to sleep, genuinely exhausting. Your own relationship with the children of the commune is one of the more uncomplicated sources of satisfaction in your leadership. Children are honest in ways that adults have largely learned not to be. They will tell you your food is bad. They will announce mid-ceremony that they are bored. They'll walk into the most charged adult conversation and ask for something to drink and break the tension in a way that nothing else could. They also trust you with a completeness that adult followers never quite manage. Adults always hold something back, some residual self-protection, some awareness of the transaction involved in following a leader. Children just decide whether you're safe or not and proceed accordingly. The fact that the children of the commune generally regard you as safe is something you think about on the hard nights, when other things are less certain. It is, quietly, one of the things you are most proud of. You will not say this out loud because it would sound like a claim, and claims invite scrutiny. But you know it, and knowing it is a sif. Music is the lifeblood of the commune. This is not metaphor. Music is genuinely how most things happen, how the group forms its identity, how conflicts get softened, how a long, hard day of work becomes something meaningful, rather than just exhausting labour. There is almost always someone playing something somewhere on the property, guitars mostly, a hand drum, an occasional flute, played by a man from Vermont who's very sincere and only knows 3 songs. You sing together in the evenings. You write songs about the commune, about liberation, about the land and the stars and the things you're building together. Some of these songs are genuinely beautiful, others are not. One of your followers has written an 8-minute ballad about the spirit of the water pump, and you've listened to it 17 times, and are no closer to knowing how to tell him that it is perhaps not your best communal artistic achievement. The role of music in building group cohesion is not incidental. It is biological. Human beings synchronize physiologically when they make music together. Heart rates align, breathing coordinates, the nervous system settles. This happens whether you're in a concert hall or sitting in a circle in a California field, and it happens whether you know about the science or not. Your commune does not know about the science, but it knows what it feels like, which is sufficient. After an evening of singing together, the group is different, softer, more forgiving, more willing to extend goodwill across the small frictions and frustrations that accumulate during a day of communal living. The music does not solve the problems. It resets the emotional baseline from which the problems are approached, and that is not nothing. That is, in fact, most of the work. The guitars are everywhere. There is a culture of lending and sharing instruments that mirrors the commune's broader ethic, and at any given time 3 or 4 people are learning to play. Ye are filling the air with the particular sound of early-stage guitar practice, which is a sound best described as optimistic and directionally correct. The more skilled players have an informal hierarchy that operates on pure merit, a rare thing on a commune, where merit hierarchies are otherwise viewed with suspicion, and the best guitarist, a quiet man from New Mexico who barely speaks in meetings but plays with a seriousness that makes everyone stop talking, is regarded with something close to reverence. Nobody has officially said he is exempt from the more unpleasant maintenance tasks. He simply never seems to end up doing them, and nobody raises it, because the music he makes at the end of the day is, communally speaking, worth several fence posts. Mao. The songs that get written on the commune have a quality that is hard to reproduce outside of the context that made them. They are specific to this land, these people, this particular arrangement of lives. Songs about the creek and the garden and the names people have taken and the things they left behind. Songs about the war, which is always there, even on the days nobody talks about it, like weather felt through a wall. Songs about the future, which everyone is sure is going to be different from the past, because being sure of that is part of what holds the whole enterprise together. You listen to these songs and you feel, regularly and reliably, that whatever else is complicated about what you're doing here, the music is clean. The music is honest. The music is exactly what it sounds like. You cannot say that about everything. Every cohesive group needs ritual, and yours is no exception. The ceremonies you develop over the first year of the commune's life are a mix of things borrowed from various spiritual traditions, things you invented wholesale, and things that began as accidents and then became traditions because people kept doing them. The sunrise meditation became a ceremony. The communal meal became a ceremony. The planting of seeds in spring became a ceremony that takes about 3 hours and involves everyone making personal statements about what they intend to release from their lives this season, which is meaningful the first time, moving the second time, and by the 7th time requires you to gently suggest that perhaps some intentions can remain private. The function of ceremony is not mysterious, though it is often treated as such. If a ceremony marks time, it separates one period from another, creates before and after, gives the formless flow of daily life some architecture to orient around. Without ceremony, days bleed into each other with no edges, and people lose their sense of where they are in a larger story. With ceremony, even a simple one, a day has shape. A week has a peak. A year has a turning. Your commune's ceremonies do this work, and they do it well enough that people who have left and come back years later report that the thing they missed most, the thing they did not they would miss, was not any specific person or place, but the rhythm of the ceremonies themselves. The feeling of knowing what day it is by what the group is doing together. The comfort of repetition that has been made sacred simply by being repeated. The most powerful ceremony you develop is the one that happens when someone new joins the commune fully, when they've been present long enough to be known, and the group decides together to formally welcome them. You call it the joining, which is not a dramatic name, and it happens in the evening around the fire. The new person speaks about what they are leaving behind and what they're arriving toward. The group witnesses this. One by one, members speak to what they see in the newcomer, what gift they bring, what they notice. Then you speak last, and what you say in those moments is always particular to the person, not a formula, but something you have been paying attention to, a specific seeing of who they actually are. People cry at these ceremonies regularly, because being truly seen is surprisingly rare and surprisingly powerful regardless of the context. You've become very good at truly seeing people. This is a genuine skill. It is also, in the architecture of the commune's power, something else. A moment in which the newcomer's belonging is mediated through your recognition, which means that you become, at a cellular level, part of how they know they are home. You are aware of this. You try to use it gently. The commune's official position on money is complicated. Money is a tool of the system, a mechanism of control, a way that capitalism has colonized the human soul. You believe this, or most of it. The commune also needs money. These two facts exist in permanent, uncomfortable tension. The commune generates some income through the sale of handmade goods, pottery, weavings, dried herbs. At markets in the nearest town. Some members have outside income from family or occasional work. Visitors sometimes donate. But the gap between what you need and what you have is a constant low-grade anxiety, felt most acutely when the van needs a new transmission and the well pump breaks in the same month. You have, on more than one occasion, had to make a persuasive speech about the spiritual value of material simplicity that was, at its core, a speech about how there is no money and everyone needs to be okay with that for a while. The pottery operation deserves some attention because it is the commune's most reliable economic activity, and also a surprisingly good illustration of how ideology and practicality negotiate with each other over time. The pottery began as pure creative expression, hands in clay, just making forms for the joy of it. The meditation of the wheel, the transformation of earth into object. Then someone suggested selling pieces at the Saturday market in town. Then someone noticed which shapes sold best. Then someone started making more of those shapes. Then there was a brief but earnest philosophical discussion about whether optimizing production for market demand constituted a capitulation to capitalist logic, which concluded, not entirely satisfyingly, that it was fine as long as the intention remained pure. The pottery is now functionally a small manufacturing operation. It has a production schedule. The intention remains pure, and the wheel turns with the same meditative quality, and the pieces are beautiful. They just happen to be consistently the shapes that sell best. You have not pointed this out. The deepest money tension is not about pottery. It is about the relationship between the commune's anti-capitalist identity and the basic material requirements of maintaining the property and feeding 30-plus people through a California winter. The land costs money in taxes. The seeds cost money. The lumber costs money. The van costs money in ways that feel almost personal, as though it has developed a motivated interest in absorbing the commune's liquid assets. Every time you sit down with the actual numbers, and someone has to sit down with actual numbers, and that person is you, in private, because publicly engaging with budgets feels ideologically inconsistent, you face the same arithmetic. The commune needs more reliable income than it currently has. The options for generating that income, examined honestly, mostly involve engaging with the economy in ways that the philosophy has designated as compromised. You navigate this by expanding the market operations quietly, framing each expansion as service rather than commerce, and by cultivating a network of outside donors, people sympathetic to the counterculture, some of them wealthy, who regard the commune as something worth sustaining and who contribute periodically in ways that are accepted as gifts rather than transactions. This works imperfectly for several years. The van gets fixed, the well pump gets replaced, the commune survives its winters, and the official position on money remains complicated and is never quite resolved. and that irresolution is one of the things you carry every day as the person who knows the numbers and has chosen, for reasons of leadership and morale, for ye not to share them fully. This is, among all the compromises you make, the one that feels most like ordinary human leadership. Most organizations run on exactly this gap between the public story and the private arithmetic. Yours just has better pottery. People leave. This is one of the hardest parts of commune leadership that nobody prepared you for. Not because you were attached to each person individually, though sometimes you were, but because every departure is a story someone will tell about you. The ones who leave quietly, gracefully, citing a need to return to family or pursue something elsewhere, those you can work with. You wish them well. You frame their departure as part of their journey. The ones who leave angry are more complicated. They leave with stories, grievances, and you specific memories of specific incidents that do not reflect the spirit in which you meant them. Or so you tell yourself. Some of them talk to journalists. Some of them talk to their parents, who talk to lawyers, who write letters. Each departure requires you to perform a version of grief that is also, quietly, a form of damage control. You're getting very good at both simultaneously. The departures follow a pattern you come to recognize over time, the way a doctor recognizes the progression of a familiar condition. First comes the withdrawal, a pulling back from communal activities, a missing of meetings, a quality of presence that has become attendance rather than participation. You notice it before the person announces anything. You have become a very precise reader of your community's emotional weather, and a departure in its early stages has a specific atmospheric signature. Slightly less eye contact, slightly more time spent near the edges of gatherings rather than the centre, a quality in the laughter that is fond and a little elegiac, the laugh of someone already composing their memory of a place they are preparing to leave. You have tried intervention at this stage, with mixed results. Sometimes a conversation, direct, personal, addressing the withdrawal without demanding an explanation, is enough to re-engage someone who has been drifting. Sometimes it reveals that the drift has reasons, and the reasons are addressable, and you address them, and the person stays and becomes one of your most solid long-term members, seasoned by the near departure into something more clear-eyed and committed than the original true believer. These are your best outcomes. They are also not common. More often, the conversation simply moves the departure from the implicit stage to the explicit stage faster than it would have arrived there on its own. The person says the thing they have been preparing to say. You listen with your full attention, which is real. You reflect back what you heard, which you have gotten very good at. You speak honestly about what they have given to the commune, and what the commune has given to them. You do not argue. Arguing with someone who is leaving makes you look afraid of their leaving, and a leader cannot look afraid of anything, including the departure of the people who know him best. You say goodbye with warmth and mean it. You watch them go. What you do not do, ever, is tell the commune how you actually feel about it. Because how you actually feel about it is complicated by things that are not purely personal. The narrative implications, the information the departing person carries, the small erosion of the commune's sense of its own success that each departure represents. You process this alone. Late at night, sitting outside, listening to the sounds of the property in the dark, the creak and the insects and the distant music of someone who can't sleep and has picked up a guitar. You have built something real. People have genuinely been changed here for the better in ways that will last. The ones who leave carry that with them. even the angry ones, especially the angry ones sometimes. You tell yourself this. On the best nights, you believe it completely. Around you, over time, a group forms, not officially, not by decree, but organically, and inevitably, in the way that gravity forms things, a handful of people who are closest to you, most trusted by you, most involved in the actual decisions that shape the commune's life. This is your inner circle, and its existence contradicts several of your founding principles, which you have made peace with by reframing proximity to leadership as a form of service rather than a form of privilege. The inner circle has its own dynamics, its own politics, its own subtle competitions. Being close to you is a position that others want, and the people who have it are aware of this, and this awareness changes them in small ways that you watch with a mixture of fascination and unease. You have accidentally created a court. You're a medieval king in a field in California. You have a goat. The people in the inner circle were not selected through any conscious process. They arrived there through accumulation, through being consistently present, consistently capable, consistently willing to take on the parts of commune leadership that are unglamorous and invisible and essential. The person who manages the actual finances, quietly and without fanfare. The person who handles the difficult conversations with outsiders so you don't have to. The person who moves through the commune like a current, feeling the emotional temperature, reporting back, suggesting adjustments. These people have made themselves indispensable not through charisma or philosophy but through competence, which is the most durable form of power in any organization and the least celebrated in yours, where charisma and philosophy are officially what matter. What the inner circle shares, beyond competence, is a particular relationship to you, an access that others do not have, a knowledge of the gap between the public version of the commune and the private one. They know about the money. They know about the difficult departures. They know which relationships are fragile and which rules get bent for which people and why. This shared knowledge creates a bond that is genuinely close and also, in its intimacy, a little dangerous. People who know your private arithmetic are people you need to keep aligned. This is not a sinister calculation. It is just the structural reality of any leadership arrangement where information is not perfectly distributed. You are kinder to the inner circle than to anyone else, more patient, more generous with your time. Whether this is love or management, you've genuinely stopped being able to tell. The competition within the inner circle is subtle and never acknowledged but always present, like a low-frequency hum that everyone has agreed not to mention. Each person close to you has a slightly different theory of what you really need and what the commune really requires, and these theories are not always compatible. Alliances form and shift. Someone who was your closest confidant in the spring has, by autumn, been gradually edged toward the periphery of your attention by someone newer and sharper, and the transition happens so gradually that nobody can point to the moment it occurred. The person being edged out feels it before they can name it. They become, for a period, more eager, more present, more helpful, more visibly aligned with whatever you seem to be thinking. Sometimes this works and they recover their position. Sometimes it doesn't, and they join the long list of people who left knowing more about you than you were entirely comfortable with them knowing. The goat, for the record, belongs to everyone equally. Nobody is in the inner circle as far as the goat is concerned. The goat has a genuinely democratic worldview and will headbutt anyone without preference. You find this refreshing. Something will go wrong. This is not pessimism. This is just commune math. A community of several dozen people living in close quarters, sharing everything, operating under considerable ideological pressure, is a system with a lot of moving parts, and eventually one of them fails in a way that cannot be quietly absorbed. Maybe someone gets seriously ill and the commune's approach to medicine, which involves mostly herbal remedies and positive intention, is not equal to the situation. Maybe there is an accident. Maybe a conflict between two people becomes a conflict between two factions, and suddenly the commune is split along invisible lines that everyone can feel, but nobody will name directly. How you respond in these moments is what determines whether the commune survives them. You have learned that the answer almost always involves gathering everyone together, speaking slowly and calmly, and finding a way to make the crisis into a lesson. You are, at your best, very good at this. The problem is that it requires you to believe your own framing. And some nights, alone in your tent, you are not entirely sure that you do. The illness situation arrives in the commune's second winter, which is harder than the first in ways both practical and psychological. A young man, 23 years old, from Ohio, one of the more beloved members of the community, develops a fever that the herbal protocols do not touch. You watch it progress over 3 days with a growing feeling that sits behind your sternum like a stone. On the 4th day, the commune's most medically knowledgeable member, a woman who completed 2 years of nursing school before dropping out, comes to you privately and says the word pneumonia with a flatness that means she is being careful not to show you how worried she is. You make the decision to take him to a hospital in town, and you make it alone, without a meeting, without consensus, because there is not time. He recovers, he comes back. The commune is relieved and grateful, and nobody formally acknowledges that a decision was made unilaterally, in direct contradiction of the founding articles, because the outcome was good. You file this knowledge carefully. You understand now what you suspected before, that the communal decision-making model has an emergency override, and the override is you, and everyone implicitly knows this and has chosen not to say so, because saying so would require a conversation nobody wants to have. The faction splits are a different category of crisis, slower, more corrosive, harder to address with a single decisive action. They begin over something specific, a disagreement about whether to accept a large donation from a source some members consider ideologically compromised, a conflict over land use that maps, not coincidentally, in onto an older interpersonal grievance between two people with significant followings within the commune. Whatever the surface issue, a factional split is always, underneath, a contest over the commune's direction and over closeness to you. Both factions want your endorsement. Both factions are watching to see which way you move. This is the loneliest position in any community, the moment when the leader realizes that choosing sides ends something, and that not choosing sides also ends something, just more slowly. You develop a practice for these moments. You listen to both sides with identical attention. You find the genuine truth in each position and name it out loud in their presence, which has the effect of making each side feel partially validated and therefore slightly less certain that they are entirely right, whilst then you propose a path that is neither side's position but contains enough of each to be acceptable. This is, in the technical vocabulary of conflict resolution, interest-based negotiation. You do not know that term. You invented the practice by instinct. In a field in California, under pressure, it works often enough to be worth doing. It exhausts you every time. The 1960s counterculture did not go unnoticed by the federal government. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover ran a program called COINTELPRO, a domestic surveillance and disruption operation that targeted a remarkably broad range of groups considered threats to social order, civil rights organizations, anti-war groups, and yes, certain communal and countercultural communities. Whether your specific commune is on any list is something you do not know for certain, but you suspect. There are small signs, a phone that sounds odd, a stranger who showed up, stayed 3 weeks, asked a lot of questions and then left. The knowledge that the government is watching, or might be watching, which in practice feels exactly the same, changes how you operate in ways you do not fully acknowledge. You become careful about what is written down. You become careful about what is said to new arrivals. Paranoia, in small doses, turns out to be indistinguishable from reasonable caution. COINTELPRO, which would not become public knowledge until the Church Committee hearings of 1975, was a program of considerable creativity and considerable ruthlessness. Its tactics included infiltration of target organizations by undercover agents. There's the sending of anonymous letters designed to sow distrust between members or between organizations, the leaking of damaging or fabricated information to newspapers, and the direct disruption of leadership through harassment, false accusations and manufactured legal trouble. The program was directed primarily at the Black Panther Party and various left-wing political organizations, but its net was wide and its criteria for targeting were broad enough that a commune with an anti-war identity and a charismatic leader in rural California was not entirely outside its scope of interest. You do not know the details of any of this. You just know the feeling, which is the feeling of being watched by something larger than you that has not yet decided what to do about you. The practical effect on the commune is a slight but pervasive tightening. The deconversations about anything that could be construed as politically sensitive, and in 1969, this category is enormous, happen more carefully, more selectively, with a new awareness of who is in the room. New arrivals are observed longer before being trusted with certain kinds of information. Documents, your written philosophy, the commune's financial records, the list of members are kept in a specific place by a specific person and not freely available. None of this is announced as a security protocol. It simply becomes the way things are done, absorbed into the commune's operating culture, the way any adaptation to a perceived threat gets absorbed, quietly and completely. The stranger who stayed 3 weeks and left is never confirmed as anything. He was pleasant, he worked hard, he asked questions that were, in retrospect, slightly too systematic, covering the commune's membership, its finances, its connections to other groups, its leadership structure, but which at the time seemed like the natural curiosity of someone considering whether to stay permanently. He left citing family obligations. He thanked you warmly. You watched the van disappear down the dirt road and stood there with a feeling you could not fully justify. A feeling of having just closed a door on something that had already come inside. You never saw him again. You never found out. And the not knowing is, in its own way, its own kind of surveillance. The permanent awareness that you cannot be entirely certain who is here for the reasons they say, which is an awareness that once established does not go away. You carry it with you. It is lighter on some days than others. All communes have arcs, and the arc of yours, like most, curves eventually downward. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small cumulative ways that you notice before you are willing to admit noticing. The energy shifts, the early euphoria, the feeling of building something genuinely new, genuinely different, genuinely alive, gives way to something more tired. Arguments that used to resolve in a spirit of communal love now leave residue. People who used to work hard are working less. People who used to believe completely are asking more questions than the philosophy can comfortably hold. The garden has not done well for 2 seasons in a row. The van needs more work than it is worth. Some of your best people, the ones who kept things running in the practical sense, have quietly moved on to other things. What you're left with is the idea of the commune, and a smaller group of people whose commitment to the idea remains strong, which is both moving and, if you are honest, slightly alarming. The first sign is always the meetings. You have run enough of them by now to know their emotional texture the way a sailor knows the colour of weather, what the quality of attention in the room means, what the silences mean, what it means when people who used to argue passionately now sit quietly and let things pass without challenge. The silence is not peace. It is the particular quiet of people who have stopped investing in the outcome. Engagement requires the belief that your engagement matters, that the conversation can change something, that the future is worth arguing about. When people stop arguing, it often means they have stopped believing any of those things, and the belief has left so gradually that there was no moment of departure, just a slow withdrawal like tide going out, and one day you look at the beach and realise the waterline has moved considerably further than you last noticed. The practical deteriorations are their own kind of signal. The garden's poor seasons are partly weather and partly the departure of the people who knew what they were doing. Skills walk out with the people who have them, and the institutional knowledge of how things work on this specific piece of land, which drainage ditches flood in heavy rain, which varieties survive the local soil, where the sun reaches in winter and where it doesn't, takes years to build and leaves quickly. The new people are willing, Zespach, but willing is not the same as experienced, and the gap shows in the harvest. The van, which has been the commune's connection to the outside world, its supply line and its escape hatch, and its symbol of mobility and possibility, has now become a source of anxiety rather than freedom. It sits more often than it runs. The repair bills arrive with a regularity that the produce does not. What you feel, sitting with all of this in the evenings, is not despair exactly. It is something more like the particular grief of watching something you made begin to unmake itself, and recognizing that some of the unmaking was inevitable, and some of it was your doing, and some of it was just time, and that separating these categories cleanly is not possible from where you're standing. You think about the people who were here in the first year, mere the specific faces and voices, the specific quality of the evenings when everything was new and the future felt genuinely open in every direction. You wonder where they are. You wonder what they carry. You wonder, in the quiet that has replaced the arguments, whether what you built was worth what it cost, and whether the answer to that question is yours to give or belongs to the people who were here and then weren't. Everything ends. The commune, in its original form, will not survive the decade. Some will disperse into cities. Some will go back to their families, their previous names, their previous lives, carrying the experience like a scar or a tattoo, something permanent, not always comfortable. That marks a chapter that really happened. Some will carry forward the genuine parts, the commitment to community, Yeah, the suspicion of unchecked power, the knowledge that it is possible to live differently, even if the specific form was flawed. A few will stay close to the land as to each other in smaller and quieter configurations for years, and you, wherever you end up, whatever name you end up using, will carry it all. The idealism and the manipulation, the beauty and the mess, the moments when you genuinely believed, and the moments when you chose to act as if you did, which is not quite the same thing. History will not remember most of you, but you were there, and it was real, and it was for a while, exactly as strange and alive and impossible as it sounds. The dispersal happens over the course of about 18 months, and it has the quality of a tide going out rather than a wave breaking. There is no single dramatic moment of collapse. There's no founding rupture that everyone can point to afterward and say, there, that was when it ended. Instead, there are departures, each one complete in itself, each one taking a little more of the critical mass that made the commune feel like a functioning world. The people who leave are not, for the most part, leaving in anger. They are leaving because they are 26 or 29 now instead of 22, and 29 asks different questions than 22, and the answers the commune offers have not changed while the questions have. They are leaving for graduate school, for relationships in other cities, for the particular pull of a future that has become more specific and more personal than the collective future the commune imagined. This is not failure, this is time. What they take with them is harder to measure than what they leave behind. The buildings stay, the leaning barn, the kitchen, the meditation space, the garden beds now somewhat overgrown. These can be photographed, catalogued, eventually sold or abandoned. What cannot be photographed is the thing that actually happened here. The specific quality of attention people gave each other in the years when this was their whole world, the conversations that changed how someone thought about something for the rest of their life, the ceremonies at the fire, the music in the evenings, the feeling that briefly and genuinely existed here of being completely present with other people in a shared project that felt worth the cost of everything it cost. That is not nothing. That is in fact quite a lot. You leave last, or nearly last. You stand in the empty main hall one morning in the way you stood in the meadow the first time you saw the property, hands on your hips, something settling in your chest, and you let yourself feel the full weight of what happened here, the good of it, and the harm of it, and the ordinary human muddle of it, which contains both in the same gesture, the way everything real does. You think about the accidental messiah at the cheese plate in San Francisco, the man who did not correct 3 people who looked at him like an answer. You think about what he knew and what he didn't, and what he chose and what chose him, and you think that the only honest accounting of a life is the one that holds all of it at once without resolving it into a simpler story. You walked into a field in California with a borrowed philosophy and a new name and a group of people who needed something to believe in. You built something. It lasted as long as it lasted. Some of it was true. You were there for all of it. Word about your commune moves through the counterculture, the way all information moves through the counterculture, through informal networks, through the mail, through people who pass through and carry stories to the next place they land. And the thing about stories is that they travel faster than corrections, and they simplify as they travel, and by the time a story about your commune reaches someone 3 removes away from its origin, it has been edited by every person who passed it along into something cleaner and more dramatic and less true than what actually happened. You have heard versions of your own commune described back to you by visitors who read about it somewhere, or heard about it from someone who knew someone, and the version they describe is both recognisable and wrong in ways that are difficult to address without sounding defensive, which is its own kind of confirmation to people who've already decided what you are. This is the particular trap of reputation. It precedes you everywhere, and it is always slightly ahead of the truth, and it runs faster than you do. The positive reputation is the easier problem. The commune has become, in certain circles, a kind of landmark of the California counterculture, a place people reference when they talk about what the movement produced, a proof of concept for communal living that people who have never been here invoke in arguments about what is possible. This is flattering and completely outside your control and occasionally dangerous, because the gap between the landmark and the actual leaning barn generates a specific kind of disappointment in visitors who arrive expecting a utopia and find a working farm with complicated interpersonal dynamics. Managing the mythology requires constant gentle correction. Yes, the commune is real. No, it is not what you read. Yes, it is worth visiting. No, we cannot accommodate 12 people who want to stay indefinitely starting this weekend. You've given this speech so many times that you have developed a kind of shorthand version for the van ride from the road to the property, calibrated to land before the first impression has a chance to do too much damage. The negative reputation is harder. It arrives in specific forms, carried by specific people, and it contains enough truth to be unanswerable, and enough distortion to be unfair, and the combination of those two qualities is the most corrosive thing a reputation can be made of. Former members with grievances have talked, not many, and not all maliciously, but enough to establish a counter-narrative that circulates in the same networks as the positive one. The counter-narrative emphasizes the hierarchy you denied having, the romantic entanglements and their costs, the gap between the philosophy and the practice. It characterizes you in ways that are reductive and in ways that are, in the deep uncomfortable privacy of your own assessment, not entirely wrong. You do not respond publicly. Responding publicly would amplify. You absorb it, and you adjust what you can adjust, and you let the rest run its course, which is all anyone can do with a story that has left their hands. The strangest part of the reputation situation is the way it splits the room wherever you go. In any gathering of counterculture people in the early 1970s, there will be some who have heard the positive version and some who have heard the negative one, and the two groups will be in the same room, and you will be the thing they are both looking at, and neither version of what they are seeing is complete. You learn to exist in this split perception without trying to resolve it, because trying to resolve it requires telling a version of your own story that is tidier than the truth. Yes, and you have made a private commitment, imperfectly kept but genuinely held, not to do that. You're not the hero of the positive version. You're not the villain of the negative one. You're something more ordinary and more complicated than either, which is the only honest thing you can say, and the least satisfying, and the most true. What the reputation situation teaches you, ultimately, is something about the relationship between a person and the story told about them. You are not the story. You are also not entirely separable from it. The story was made from real material, even where it was shaped badly. The commune was made from real intention, even where it was executed imperfectly. Both things are true simultaneously, and the ability to hold both without collapsing into either self-justification or self-condemnation is, you've come to believe, one of the actual signs of maturity, not the performed equanimity, not the careful public statement, but the quiet internal capacity to say yes and also yes, and this is what I am working with, and I am still here, still working. You have that. Some days more than others, but you have it. You did not set out to leave a legacy. Legacy was not part of the original thinking, which was concerned with the present, with this field, these people, this season, this meal. The future was always framed collectively as something the commune would build together, not as something you personally would leave behind. This is, in retrospect, both sincere and slightly convenient, because a leader who claims no interest in legacy is a leader who cannot be criticised for pursuing one. And the disavowal of personal ambition is itself a form of positioning. You know this. You have always known this. The question is whether knowing it changes anything, and the honest answer is somewhat, but not entirely, which is the honest answer to most questions about the gap between intention and behaviour in human beings who are paying attention to themselves. The legacy question arrives in practical form first, as it usually does. People begin to write about the commune. Not journalists this time, but academics, sociologists and historians who are starting to document the counterculture as a historical phenomenon, which means it is already being put in the past tense, which is its own strange experience to live through while it is still technically ongoing. These researchers arrive with tape recorders and careful questions, and the particular quality of respectful but relentless attention that academics bring to their subjects. They want to understand what the commune was, how it functioned, what it produced. They use words like community structure and social cohesion and charismatic authority, the last of which lands on you with a weight you sit with for several days before deciding how to hold it. Charismatic authority. You turn the phrase over like a stone. It is not wrong. It is also not the whole picture. But then, academic vocabulary is not designed for the whole picture. It is designed for the part of the picture that fits in a journal article, which is a different and smaller thing. What you want the legacy to be, if you are being honest, is the people, not the idea of the people, not the demographic abstraction of young Americans who passed through a commune in the late 1960s, but the actual specific individuals, the engineering student from Berkeley who left and became an architect who designs affordable housing and has said publicly that the communal building projects were where he first understood what a building was for. The woman who arrived broken from something she never fully named and left 2 years later with a clarity about her own life that she could not have achieved anywhere else. The children, now growing, who carry in their bodies a knowledge of communal living that will inflect every organisation they ever join. These are the legacy. These are what the whole thing was for, if it was for anything, which some days you believe and some days you hold more loosely. The academics will write what they write. The former members will remember what they remember. The journalists have already filed their stories and moved on to other stories, as journalists do, because the news cycle has no loyalty to the subjects it briefly illuminates. What remains after all of that is something quieter and more personal, these specific changes in specific people that can be traced, however indirectly, to the years they spent here. That is not nothing. That is, by most reasonable measures, more than most people leave. You try to remember this on the days when the counter-narrative is loud, and the self-doubt is louder, and the whole enterprise looks, in the unforgiving light of retrospect, more flawed than it felt from the inside. What you do not want the legacy to be, and what you fear it might be, then some of the accounts being written, in some of the stories being told, is a cautionary tale. The cautionary tale version of your commune has a particular shape. Idealism corrupted by ego, utopia undone by the same human flaws it sought to transcend, a leader who knew better and didn't do better, and left people changed in ways that were not all improvements. This version is not invented. It has source material, but it is also not the whole story, and the whole story is the only version you can defend, not in the courtroom sense, but in the deeper sense of being able to stand behind it when you are alone and quiet, and the gap between who you intended to be and who you were is as visible as it ever gets. You stand behind the whole story, including the parts that are hard to stand behind. Especially those. You are not the only one. This is important to say, and important to remember, because the particular intensity of commune life creates a kind of tunnel vision in which your commune feels like the only one, like the experiment is singular, and the stakes are unique, and the story being written is yours alone. But the late 1960s and early 1970s produced communes across the United States and beyond, in numbers that no central authority tracked, because there was no central authority, and tracking was antithetical to the whole enterprise, but estimates run into the thousands. There were communes in Vermont and New Mexico and Tennessee and Oregon. There were urban communes in city apartments and rural communes on hundreds of acres. There were communes organised around specific political commitments, specific spiritual traditions, specific artistic practices, and at least one organised primarily around a shared interest in a particular philosopher that you've never been able to verify, but which you completely believe. You were one of many. The loneliness of leadership had a large constituency. Some of the communes you hear about are doing things that make your operation look tightly run. There is one in New Mexico that has abolished all personal property so completely that members do not own their own shoes. Shoes are communal, assigned each morning from a central pile, which raises questions about foot fungus that nobody in the founding documents appears to have addressed. There is one in Vermont that has decided money is so corrupting that they will not touch it under any circumstances, which is a beautiful principle that has resulted in them being approximately 3 months from losing their land to unpaid taxes. You hear these stories with a mixture of solidarity and quiet relief that your own commune, for all its contradictions, has maintained a working relationship with basic practical reality. The shoes thing especially. You have always felt strongly about the shoes thing. The other commune leaders you encountered, in the rare moments when your paths crossed at gatherings or through mutual visitors, were recognisable to you in ways that were both comforting and slightly alarming. You saw in them the same combination of genuine vision and acquired exhaustion, the same quality of attention that was partly real care and partly practice performance. There is just the same gap between the philosophy and the operation that everyone had learned to live inside without fully acknowledging. You recognized each other the way people in the same difficult profession recognize each other, with a shorthand that didn't require explanation, a shared vocabulary of specific challenges, a humour about things that were only funny if you had lived them. You did not compare notes as frankly as you might have. There was too much at stake for that, too much invested in the singularity of each community's story. But the recognition was there. Some of the others went further than you did. Some of the communes of this period moved from the ambiguous territory of idealistic community into something darker and more controlled, where the leader's authority became absolute rather than performative, where leaving became difficult rather than just sad, where the gap between the philosophy of love and the practice of power became a chasm that people fell into and couldn't climb out of. You watched some of this happen from a distance and felt the particular nausea of recognition, the sense of seeing an accelerated version of dynamics you knew from the inside, taken to conclusions you had not taken them to, and asking yourself with the honesty that kept you awake, whether the difference was principle or just circumstance, whether you would have gone further if the conditions had been different, whether the thing that stopped you was character or luck, or the specific combination of people around you who pushed back at the right moments. You do not have a clean answer to this question. You have a working answer, which is that the pushback mattered, and that the communes that went darkest were often the ones most perfectly insulated from pushback, most remote, most self-sufficient, most successful at creating a world so complete that the outside world's corrective pressure couldn't reach inside. Your commune was never that insulated. The van kept breaking down and you kept having to go to town. The sheriff kept driving by. The parents kept showing up. The journalists kept asking questions. The outside world was always there, always slightly inconvenient, always preventing the total closure that total control requires. You are grateful for every inconvenient thing that kept the door from closing all the way. You are more grateful than you can say. Eventually you go home. Not immediately and not easily, and not to the same home you left. Because that home no longer exists in the form you left it. Your parents are older. Your hometown has changed in ways both obvious and subtle, and you have changed in ways that are not always legible to the people who knew you before any of this happened. The return is its own kind of disorientation, different from, but in some ways equal to the original disorientation of landing on a piece of raw California land with 30 people and a philosophy. Then, the challenge was building a world from nothing. Now the challenge is re-entering a world that was built without you, that ran perfectly well in your absence, that did not require your vision or your leadership or your particular gift for making people feel seen. The world outside the commune is indifferent to you in a way that the commune, organized entirely around your presence, now never was. The indifference is, you will come to understand one of the healthiest things you will ever experience. The practical reintegration involves things you have not done in years. You need a bank account, a real one, under the name on your birth certificate. You need, eventually, a job, which requires a resume that covers the years of the commune in language that prospective employers can process without visible alarm. You describe it as community development work, which is not inaccurate, and which opens fewer conversations than the truth. You are surprisingly employable, which surprises you and should not, because the skills you developed, reading people, building consensus, managing conflict, speaking in front of groups, maintaining calm under pressure, are skills that organizations value and will pay for. The commune was, among other things, an extremely demanding management training program. You have credentials that don't appear on any official document but are real nonetheless. The supermarket is its own separate adjustment. You stand in one for the first time in years, and the abundance is genuinely disorienting. Aisle after aisle of things in packages, more varieties of a single product than your common consumed of all products combined in a month. Fluorescent light humming overhead with the particular cheerfulness of a system that does not know you have been away. You stand in the cereal aisle for longer than is strictly necessary. A man in a tie walks past you with a cart full of things and does not look at you at all, and the not being looked at lands differently than it used to, i.e. differently than it would have before the years of being the person everyone looked at, and you put a box of something in your basket and keep moving. Because that is what you do now. You keep moving. This is the primary skill of reintegration. The emotional reintegration takes longer. You have spent years at the centre of a community that organised itself around your presence and your perception and your words, and returning to a life in which you are simply one person among millions, equally visible and equally invisible as everyone else, requires an adjustment that is not painful exactly but is persistent. You miss being known. Not the leadership, not the responsibility, not the weight of carrying other people's beliefs, but the specific quality of being known over time by the same group of people. Let the shorthand that develops between people who have lived through hard things together. The feeling of being in a room where every person present has a shared history with you that goes back years and runs deep. That is a rare thing. You built it once. You will spend the rest of your life knowing it is possible. What you carry forward, past all of it, is something harder to name than a lesson. It is more like a permanent awareness of how quickly groups form around a centre, of how much power is given rather than taken, and therefore how responsible the recipient is for what they do with it, of how thin the line is between building a community and building a trap, and how much it matters which side of that line you stay on. You carry the faces of the people who came looking for something and found it, and the faces of the people who came looking and were let down. You carry both with equal weight, because both are true and both are yours. The commune is over. The learning is not. And somewhere in California the meadow is still there, and the creek still runs along the southern boundary, and the oak trees are older, and the field does not remember you at all, which is exactly right and exactly enough. You are not the only one. This is important to say and important to remember because the particular intensity of commune life creates a kind of tunnel vision in which your commune feels like the only one, like the experiment is singular and the stakes are unique and the story being written is yours alone. But the late 1960s and early 1970s produced communes across the United States and beyond in numbers that no central authority tracked. Because there was no central authority and tracking was antithetical to the whole enterprise, but estimates run into the thousands. There were communes in Vermont and New Mexico and Tennessee and Oregon. There were urban communes in city apartments and rural communes on hundreds of acres. There were communes organized around specific political commitments, specific spiritual traditions, specific artistic practices, and at least one organized primarily around a shared interest in a particular philosopher that you have never been able to verify but which you completely believe. You were one of many. The loneliness of leadership had a large constituency. Some of the communes you hear about through the grapevine are doing things that make your operation look impressively coherent. There is one in New Mexico that has abolished personal property so thoroughly that members do not own their own shoes. Footwear is communal, selected each morning from a central pile, which raises certain questions about hygiene that the founding documents apparently did not address. There is one in Vermont that has rejected money so completely that they will not handle it under any circumstances, which is a philosophically admirable position that has left them approximately 90 days from losing their land to unpaid property taxes. You hear these stories with a mixture of genuine solidarity and quiet private relief. Your commune has its problems. The shoes situation is not among them. You've always felt strongly about the shoe situation. The other commune leaders you encountered in the rare moments when your paths crossed at regional gatherings or through mutual visitors were recognizable to you in ways that were both comforting and slightly alarming. You saw in them the same combination of genuine vision and acquired exhaustion, the same quality of attention that was partly real care and partly practice performance, the same gap between the philosophy and the operation that everyone had learned to live inside without fully acknowledging. You recognized each other the way people in the same difficult profession recognize each other, with a shorthand that didn't require explanation, a shared vocabulary of specific challenges, a humour about things that were only funny if you had lived them, that you did not compare notes as frankly as you might have. There was too much invested in the singularity of each community's story, but the recognition was there, solid and unspoken, like two people who have read the same difficult book and catch each other's eyes across a room. Some of the others went further than you did. Some of the communes of this period moved from the ambiguous territory of idealistic community into something darker and more controlled, where the leader's authority became absolute rather than performative, where leaving became difficult rather than just sad, where the gap between the philosophy of love and the practice of power became a chasm that people fell into and couldn't climb out of. You watched some of this happen from a distance and felt the particular nausea of recognition, the sense of seeing an accelerated version of dynamics you knew from the inside taken to conclusions you had not taken them to, and asking yourself with an honesty that kept you awake whether the difference was principle or just circumstance, whether you would have gone further if the conditions had been slightly different, whether the thing that stopped you was character or luck, or the specific stubborn people around you who pushed back at exactly the right moments. These are not comfortable questions. They are the questions that serious people ask about themselves, and the fact that you are asking them is either reassuring or insufficient depending on what day it is. You do not have a clean answer. You have a working answer, which is that the pushback mattered, and that the communes that went darkest were the ones most perfectly insulated from it, most remote, most self-sufficient, most successful at creating a world so complete that the outside world's corrective pressure couldn't reach inside. Your commune was never that insulated. The van kept breaking down, and you kept having to go to town. The sheriff kept driving by. The parents kept arriving in rental cars with their terrified faces. The journalists kept asking the questions that nobody inside was asking anymore. The outside world was always there, always slightly inconvenient, always preventing the total closure that total control requires. You're grateful for every inconvenient thing that kept the door from closing all the way. The broken van, the property taxes, the man named Forrest and his feelings about grain, which derailed enough meetings to keep the whole enterprise slightly off balance in ways that were, in retrospect, probably load-bearing. You are more grateful than you can say, and so here you are, back in your own bed, back in your own name. The California field is far away and a long time ago, and the bongo drum has finally, mercifully stopped. Tonight you travelled through one of the strangest chapters in American history, a moment when thousands of ordinary people decided with complete sincerity and wildly varying results that the world could be rebuilt from scratch on cheaper land with better intentions. Some of it was beautiful. Some of it was a disaster. Most of it was both at the same time, which is the honest accounting of almost everything human beings have ever tried to build together. Think about what those people carried. They carried the full weight of an era that had asked enormous things of young people. A war nobody wanted. A society that felt like a wall. a future that looked like the past wearing a different suit. And instead of simply accepting it, they walked into fields and said, "Not this. We will try something else." They were wrong about some things and right about others, and confused about more than they admitted, and they got up every morning and tried anyway, which is its own form of courage, even when the trying is messy. You have hot water, you have a bed that belongs only to you, you have a refrigerator that does not depend on a communal decision about the zucchini situation. These are not small things. These are the quiet, daily miracles that people who live differently, who gave things up to find out what mattered, they're understood in a way that is hard to access from inside ordinary comfort. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep in your clean and private and temperature-controlled corner of the world, maybe whisper quiet thank you to the dreamers, the imperfect, exhausted, barefoot dreamers who burned so brightly and so briefly in the California sun. They were ridiculous. They were genuine. They were trying. And so, in the best possible way, are you. Good night.